Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. I thought I might begin by playing a piece that I was planning to play last night, but I didn't get around to. It's not really anything to do with the title of the workshop, but anyway, it's called Etude Samfonique, and it's by what's his first name? Oh, Enrico Bossi. And the pedal part is not slow. Thank you. That was meant to be my encore last night. Yeah. I actually missed more than one. Actually, I think it was this morning's gospel that was about, wasn't it about commit a sin with one eye or one foot, and then you have to chop it off. But I commit it wasn't it? This morning, yes. I commit a sin with one foot every Sunday. Okay, so the title of this workshop, that George asked me to talk about practicing new pieces and learning new repertoire. And how do I prepare for recitals versus how do I prepare for Sunday mornings? So I'm going to share with you my experience over the last 20, 25 years. And I'm not going to give you any definitive answers because we're all different and we all have different hands and we all have different minds. So I won't be saying you must do this or you must not do this. And please interrupt me for questions at any time. I don't want you to get bored with what I'm saying. So for me, practicing for recitals is much more of a long-term thing compared with practicing for a Sunday morning. So with a big piece like the 17-minute piece by Healy Willan that I played yesterday, that takes months or maybe even years to learn really well. But for me, practicing for Sunday morning is a much more short-term thing. But of course, there is overlap. I'm sure you, like me, play certain pieces in recitals as well as Sunday mornings. But when I'm learning a new piece, regardless of what it's for, I basically learn it in the same way. The process is the same. And when I was thinking about what I'd say today, I was thinking that as church organists, we're expected to play a new prelude and a new postlude every week. And I think that's extremely difficult. That's very demanding. I don't think someone that plays another instrument has that demand. But we have to have something ready for every Sunday. And in my experience, that sometimes leads to bad habits. I mean, for me, I've often caught myself saying, oh, well, that's good enough. No one will know whether I play a few wrong notes. But I don't, that's not a very good habit to get into, to think like that. And I was thinking about the fact that we were expected to have new repertoire ready constantly every week. I thought, well, I looked at the web page of a very famous Russian pianist and thinking, well, I wonder what his programs are. So I looked at Evgeny Kissin's recital schedule for the next year, and he's got 32 concerts all over the world, and 23 of them are exactly the same program of Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, and Chopin. I mean, exactly the same program. And another 6 are a different program, but those 6 are the same. He's playing with another pianist. And then the final 3 are the same piano concerto, Rachmaninoff third piano concerto. So, that is the opposite of what we have to do. I suspect I don't really know how he prepares for his concert career, but I suspect he was preparing those 2 programs that he's doing right now several years ago, maybe even 5 or 10 years ago. And of course, right now, he needs to continue practicing those pieces to keep them in shape for his concerts. But I would also guess that most of his practice time right now is on repertoire that he plans to play in a few years' time, 5 or 10 years' time. So I guess what I'm getting at is that learning takes a long time, and we as organists have a demanding job to do, to have things ready. And the first thing I think about when I think, how do I practice, I've written down here, playing through something, and then again, and then playing it again, is not what I would call practicing. So, how do I go about learning a new piece? I've written down lots of ideas here, and I've written down, let's imagine there's no deadline, which I know is a bit of a unrealistic thing to imagine. But let's just imagine there's no deadline. So the first thing I've written down is, well, I need to buy the music, the sheet music. And one of my teachers, David Sanger, instilled in me the idea that don't just go to the shop and buy the first copy of that you see of that piece. He was very interested in finding the right edition. And I'm the same. I like to know what the composer wrote. I don't want to know what some editor thinks. And so, as an example, very recently I decided I want to learn the Sunday music by Petra Eben, or is it Eben? I never know. And so I thought, well, I emailed someone I know in London, David Titterington, who has played all of Eben's works, somewhat of an expert, I think. And I said, do I just buy the edition that's available online? And he said, no. He was with Eben before he died with someone else who was persuading Eben to make some changes to the score. And David thought that Eben was a bit reluctant to do so. So David suggested I should buy the first edition, which I think was in the 1950s in the Czech Republic. So if I hadn't emailed David, I wouldn't know that. So I thought that was very interesting. And then I thought, well, how do I get this first edition? So I emailed someone at Blackwell's music shop in Oxford, Peter, with the beard, you know. Who knows everything. And so he said, I'll get to work on this, and he found a way to get the first edition. And several months later, it appeared in my mailbox in Fort Worth. So, as I said earlier, learning takes a long time, and that's just the first thing, getting the right music. The second thing I would do is just try playing it through very roughly, very badly, because of course it would be difficult to sight read, but just to get a sense of the whole piece. And if it's a large piece in several movements, I would take one movement at a time. And then I like to do quite a lot of work away from the keyboard. I find it interesting to analyze the piece or the movement and make some notes. So for example, I like to see whether it's in sections, whether I can divide the piece into sections, because I might approach it by learning one section at a time. So if it's in, for example, ABA form, because I'm weird, I like to analyze how the first A section and the last A section might be, I mean, they're basically the same, but are they exactly the same? And if they're not, what are the differences? And I've just done exactly this with a piece of Chopin that I'm practicing on the piano. There's an F-sharp major bit and there's an E-flat major bit, which are basically exactly the same. And I decided to photocopy the E-flat major bit and circle in red everything that's different. I mean, obviously it's transposed, but apart from the transposition. And there were a lot of little things which I thought was interesting, and some of them I could explain. Others were a bit odd. But obviously that kind of detail is particularly important if you want to memorize a piece. So then, also away from the keyboard, I would think the tempo, is it the same throughout, or does it change? The key signature, the same questions. The time signature, the same questions. And then I would think, do I understand everything in the score? When I was learning Howells's Sun Prelude, Set 1, Number 1, I think it's in that piece, there was a Italian term, affanoso, which I had no idea what it meant. Affanoso. Anyway, so I looked it up and wrote it in, and it means breathless or excited or something like that. I'm just curious to find all these things out. And another example would be, I learned a piece by William Byrd called The Carman's Whistle, and it occurred to me that there weren't cars in the 16th century. So I researched this, and I think a carman was someone with his cart who was rounding up animals and whistled at the same time. And another thing I like to do is, if it's a chorale prelude by Bach, I like to, what is the translation of the title? What is the translation of the whole text of the hymn? Who's the author? What liturgical season is it appropriate for? And if I've got Oh, I have got time, because remember, there's no deadline. I like to learn, I mean, this is a lifelong thing, really, just learning about the composer's life and the context of the piece is always interesting. And is it dedicated to someone, and why? I find that interesting too. So that's the kind of thing I would do away from the keyboard. And then I was thinking about, would I listen to recordings? I normally do, just to see how other people play pieces or what tempo they play them. But I think in an ideal world, I wouldn't listen to recordings, just because I'd quite like to base my interpretation on what the composer wrote rather than how someone else plays it. But normally, I'm short of time, so I listen to recordings to get ideas. And then when it comes to actually practicing, I would probably take one section or one page at a time, and the first thing, and one of the most important things for me, is working out the fingering. And I've got several points under the subject of fingering. I think this is a very important stage in the learning process. I spend a lot of time choosing fingering because I think it saves time in the end. Because if you could spend months practicing a passage with a not very good fingering, and you could think, oh, this is too difficult, I can't do this, it never goes right. And then as soon as someone gives you a better fingering, you can play it instantly. So I think it's worth spending a lot of time working out a good fingering at the start of learning a piece. And I would try every possible fingering before deciding. For example, if you're working out the fingering for the right hand, can the left hand help out, or is the left hand otherwise busy? And it's not just working out fingerings for fast and difficult passages. I would also work out fingerings for slow passages as well. And one very important thing is, I think your choice of fingering depends on what the final speed of the piece is. Because I don't think it's any good working out a fingering of a series of not semiquavers, 16th notes. It's no good working out a fingering for a string of 16th notes at a slow speed, because you might be able to play it with that fingering at a slow speed, but you won't be able to play it at a fast speed. Does that make sense? I mean, you know, so I'm trying to think of an example. I mean, if you were playing an arpeggio slowly, C major, you might go 1, 2, 3, and then bring the thumb under, if you've got plenty of time to do that. But if I was playing a C major arpeggio on the piano, and it was very fast, I wouldn't bring the thumb under like that at all. I would just kind of jump over and have the sustaining pedal down. Because I mean, you can't bring the thumb under and do an arpeggio extremely fast, I think. So I think, even though you're only just starting to learn the piece, I think you need to, when you're trying out different fingerings, it needs to be at the final speed. Of course, it'll be messy as you try, because you don't know the piece very well yet. And another thing which influences your choice of fingering would be who composed it. I mean, if it's Bach or Baroque music, I would use fingering which kind of position fingering, where I'd move from one position to another according to the beat or the phrasing. But if it was by César Franck, I would use more finger substitution and do things to make it as legato as possible. And I've also written down here thumb legato. Does anyone use thumb legato? Where you, for example, play a G with your thumb, and then if you want to go to an F sharp legato, you keep the G down, but you play the G with the middle part of your thumb, slide onto the middle part, and then you can go to the F sharp legato, which is very useful for music. I'm sorry, am I getting too close? For music like Franck and the French composers after Franck. Another thing which would affect fingering, my choice of fingering, is whether something is written in a pianistic way. For example, the Willen I played last night, I think there are some passages which feel and sound pianistic to me, and that would affect my fingering, so that instead of trying to work out a fingering that's smooth or legato, I would just play it like you would play on the piano, which is just jumping from chord to chord. Or imagine there were octaves. We don't often have would you agree we don't often have octaves in organ playing, because we don't really need it with the way an organ works. But if there are octaves, like in Wesley or Willen, I think you could just play them separated. You can still play them with a sense of line, but you don't need to worry about making them legato. So that would affect my fingering. Then I've written down, is it okay to cheat? Like if something's terribly difficult and you miss out a note, I think it's okay to cheat. I mean, if it doesn't, especially if it's a note that is doubled elsewhere in the chord, and if it makes it 10 times easier, I think we should just cheat. Or what about, I don't know what you think about using, if you've got a manual-only section and you want it to be legato, I don't know whether you sometimes use the pedal coupled down. Yes, you do. Nils. Yes, I do too. But then I also think to myself, I know the composer wants it to be legato because he wrote legato, but does that mean completely 100% legato, which I guess you can achieve with using the pedal, or does it mean kind of 90% legato, the sense of legato? I like to experiment to see what it sounds like doing the best without the pedal. But I don't know the answer to that. It depends on my mood. And then, gosh, there's so much here about fingering. I find it interesting. I suppose your choice of fingering also depends on how the notes are grouped together, or the phrasing. You might decide to change hand position or to put your thumb under at the point where a new phrase begins, or when a new group of notes starts. Another thing is it comfortable? I mean, everyone's hands are different, so I could find something comfortable which most people wouldn't. I do something strange quite often with putting my fourth finger over my fifth, especially if, let's imagine you had in the right hand just C, D, E, F, G, and then you were required to play an A flat, and then back down the same scale. I find it quite comfortable to go up the five fingers and then just reach across with the fourth onto the A flat. But I've had students that say that's ridiculous. But we're all different. And is your fingering logical? Is it natural? I mean, there's no point in finding the perfect fingering, which is so awkward that it's always going to go wrong in a performance. You might as well make it not quite so perfect and make sure it's natural. And does it sound natural? I mean, you might find the perfect legato fingering, but actually it sounds a bit jerky because you're doing so much finger substitution, it affects how it sounds. And playing large chords, if you want to play large chords legato, for example, in Max Reger's music, I often find that, say you've got 4-part chords which you're trying to do legato, which is almost impossible. I find that if the outer parts are legato, that's the important thing, to give the impression of legato. So maybe 3 of your fingers can go legato and 1 of them has to jump. That still gives the impression of being legato. And the finger that has to jump, I like to really accept in my brain that it has to jump. In other words, not try and make that jumping finger as legato, as smooth as possible. The reason I say that is I think it's going to sound jerky or it's going to sound sudden as you go from one chord to the other if you try and make that jumping finger as smooth as possible. So I like to practice, you play the 4-part chord and then you completely release the jumping finger and then nicely play the next chord. I don't know whether that makes any sense. It's a bit difficult to describe. And then how does it feel? I sometimes find, especially with slow passages, it feels particularly beautiful to use a particular fingering, maybe on a trill leading into a cadence or something. So that would definitely be a fingering to keep. And, yes, now how much fingering do you write in the score? I heard that John Scott, the wonderful John Scott, someone told me that he used to write a fingering for every single note. I don't know whether that's true. Maybe not all his music, I don't know. But I don't do that. I don't like cluttered up scores. The older I get, the more naked I like my scores to be. So I would suggest one fingering per position. You know, so when you need to go under with your thumb and go to a new position, you just write in the relevant finger. And that's all you need to write in, I think. And then once you've worked out all this marvelous fingering, the idea, I think, is to use the same fingering from then on, because that will help you feel more secure when you're nervous in a performance. But if you use a different finger on that note every single time, it will probably go wrong. So the idea is to be secure enough technically with this fingering so that you can be free to do what you want in a performance. That's the end of my fingering section. And then comes the actual practice, the technical practice. I've separated technical practice from musical practice or interpretation practice, but that might be just me. I'm a bit technically driven. That's why I'm not very musical. But I separate it. So I'm just going to talk about technical practice first of all. You probably do this, practice the right hand only, the left hand only, the pedal only, right hand and left hand and pedal, left hand and pedal, and then all of them together. I often like to practice on the piano, especially the fast and the difficult passages, mainly because I find it reveals where you're not playing with an even touch, because of course that's what a piano does, whereas an organ doesn't. Nils, wasn't there something on Facebook with Wayne Marshall who said you should practice on the piano, and Nils Hawker responded, thank you, please could you expand a little on why that would be helpful? I don't think he ever replied. Anyway, I find it very useful. That might be because I did a lot of piano when I was younger. So, yeah. And then slow practice. I like to do slow practice with a metronome and then gradually increase the tempo. So you'll often see in my scores at the beginning, right hand and left hand only, crotchet. What's a crotchet? Quarter note, 60 tick. This page. That means I've done that and I feel it's perfect. And then the next day I would put 70 tick and then 80 tick. I mean, it's very tedious, really, but that's what I do. And metronomes. Now, metronomes are interesting things. I love them. I know they're not very musical. And Gillian Weir, who I was talking about earlier, she says we should all throw our metronomes away. And I think there's a story I heard from someone. She was driving from Heathrow Airport up to her home in Durham or somewhere, and it was pouring with rain, and there was Mozart on the radio, and the windscreen wipers were going, and it was absolutely marvelous. The windscreen wipers were bang in time with the Mozart. But then 2 seconds late, or 3 seconds later, she realized, oh, they're not. But that's strange because the Mozart sounds as though the players are playing it in a steady time, you know. But of course the answer is that music breathes and music takes time and there's space in music, and so it will never be in time with the windscreen wipers. So Gillian, Dame Gillian, says throw away your metronome, but I love my metronome is my mobile phone, my cell phone. But so I use it a lot in the way I described, and gradually increase the speed. I've also written down, don't always practice loudly if it's a loud piece, but I'm sure you do that. Now, rhythms, there's one other thing I'd like to say about technical practice, and that is practicing in rhythms, which I think a lot of people do, especially dotted rhythms. Dum, da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. And then I guess the reverse of that, which is da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. I think that's useful, but I actually never use it. The rhythm I use almost every day in some context is what I call 1+4. So if you imagine you have a string of, what are they called? 16th notes. You're in 4/4 time, and you've got a measure of 16th notes, so there'll be 16 of them. And so when I say 1+4, if this is the beat, I mean 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. That's what I mean by 1+4. And the reason I think that's particularly good for that time signature is because your 4 fast notes are always leading to a note which is not on the beat, because it's easy to lead. I mean, in that example, it would be easy to do 1+3, dum, da 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 dum, da 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 da, but you're always landing on the beat, which anyone can do. But if you do 1+4, you're not. So you're forcing yourself to land on a different part of the beat, which I think makes it much more secure under your fingers. Now, having done that, so you start on the first note and you do dum da 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 dum da 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 as long as your passage is. But then you have to start on the next note, the second note, and then you go through the whole process again. So you're stopping on different notes, and then you start on the third note. Keep the metronome going because you'll get faster if you don't, I think. And then you have to start on the fourth note. And then you have to start on the fifth note. Sorry. And then you do not have to, then you're done. And the reason you don't have to stop on the the reason you don't have to start on the sixth note is because that would be exactly the same as starting on the first note. Does that make sense? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes. So you have to start 5 times. And by the time you've done your passage 5 times, you've stopped. You've done 4 fast notes leading to every single note in the passage. And I think whenever I've then played the passage after doing that, it's worked. Maybe not the next day. But I also like to go backwards, but that's partly, I don't know why I like to do that. I find it makes it even more secure. So I might, taking that same measure of 16 16th notes, I would go through them and then back, always using the same fingering that you use going forward. It's difficult, but I just find it makes it very secure. Did that make any sense? When I've explained my 1+4 thing to students, they just don't get it. Yes. Yes, well, in this piece by Bossi, I suppose I could do it with the pedals. So it's written in triplets, or groups of sextuplets, I suppose. So I would do... that's very good, because you see, it stops on the sixth of the sextuplet. Sorry, I'll go that far. And then you have to start on the second note. And then the third note. And the fourth note. And finally, the fifth note. That's the fifth note. And then another thing you could do with this passage is then add the manuals and do exactly the same thing. And I don't know whether I'll be able to do that. Get the A in the right place. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Yeah, and then you go through the other 4 repetitions. But I would have the metronome on there, and what I didn't like about what I just did was that it was a bit uneven. So if it's uneven, or if some of it's not legato and other bits are legato, I don't accept that. I would bring the metronome down and make sure it's exactly how I want it to sound. In fact, I might do that with that piece. I want to do a video of that piece. I decided when I moved to America that there's a fork down here. Why would there be a fork in a church? I decided when I moved to America, that I wanted to record 2 YouTube videos a year. I know that doesn't sound like very much, but I wanted to do them from memory. So that was a bit more of a challenge for me because I don't do much from memory. So I've done 4 so far, and I'm planning Bossi and Bach next. So I'm memorizing. I'll come to that in a second. The next, how are we doing for time? How's it going, George? Am I doing okay? So the next section on my document here is called Rubato. Can you play the piece in time without rubato? More rubato does not equal more musical, I think. I think I've had students who think they're being terribly musical by using rubato the whole time. And I don't think that's right. And the reason I like to see if I can play the piece in time without rubato is because I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I like to know what it sounds like without rubato, and then I feel I can think about how much rubato I want to add where and why. And I also like to play the end of pieces without the usual writ to see how that sounds. And then of course, it always doesn't sound quite right. So then I like to think about how much writ I want to do. Because I worry that if I do a writ at the end of the piece and lots of rubato, from the moment I start learning a piece, I worry that that rubato and that writ is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger forever. I might be wrong, but I just like to see whether I can play a piece in time. And I think one should not use rubato to make it easier to play a passage. One should not use rubato to make it easier to press a piston. There's another Gillian Weir story, but it's rather rude. So, anyway. Yes, so instead one should use rubato, I suppose, to be expressive. And I've said this to students when I used to teach, if you use rubato every measure, thinking you're very musical, I think it's horrible to listen to. And I don't think the rubato will have any effect because no one actually knows what the tempo is anyway, because it's just everything is rubato. But if you use rubato sparingly, let's randomly say once a page or once a section, everyone will notice it because everyone knows what the tempo is. So those are my thoughts on rubato. And then musical practice, or working out your interpretation. Normal people would combine that with technical practice, but I like to do the technical practice first, and then musical practice. I enjoy the freedom to make music and to work on my interpretation. And it's a wonderful feeling when you've done all the technical practice, just to have fun with the music and try things out. And I think we should be daring to experiment with different things during your practice, daring to try different interpretations of a section at a different speed, or doing a writ there, or holding that note longer, or delaying that note. Just try different things. And you don't have to decide what's best on that day, and you might think something different tomorrow, but it's just having fun with the music and playing around with it, I think is an important part of learning music. And allowing the music to breathe, when it comes to the end of a phrase, giving plenty of time, because you're not using the metronome now. So lots of rubato, too much rubato at the end of a section or the end of a phrase, just to have fun, because that will help you decide, oh, well, that is too much. But if you don't mess around with things, I guess you might become fixed in doing it one particular way. So taking lots of time and allowing sections to end, and maybe even trying playing a section at a completely different tempo, the wrong tempo. Well, is it the wrong tempo? Playing it at a much slower speed, and can you make it convincing at that speed? And if not, why not? So just playing around and trying different things, I think, is an important part. Then registration, yes. It's important to practice registration. Changes almost as if it's, pressing a piston is another note. I always think of Elgar's Sonata in G, because there's so much registration and it needs to sound seamless and even in the crescendos and diminuendos, so much so that no one knows you're pressing a million pistons all the time. So yeah, you need to decide that. And on one organ, it might make sense to press swell 2 with your second finger, but on another organ, of course, it won't, which is a challenge. But you just have to practice on your own instrument and work out exactly what to do there. And then if you're playing it somewhere else, you might have to change things. But as I mentioned earlier, Gillian Weir would scream if you slowed down in order to press a piston. Unless, of course, you want to slow down for musical reasons. So that's registration. The next thing I've written down is listening. I find it very difficult to listen to myself because I become so absorbed with reading the music in front of me and playing the notes and thinking what the next thing to do is, and becoming completely enclosed in the little space of the console, that I don't actually listen to what I'm doing. If you're worried about playing a wrong note, you're probably not listening. So I sometimes try short passages from memory, or I shut the music, which helps force me to listen, or I sometimes shut my eyes. I did that yesterday. I sometimes tell myself to smile. Just not a big grin, but just shut your eyes and smile and actually enjoy listening to yourself. Actually listen to what you're doing. I find it very difficult. I sometimes look at a window or at the altar and just get your mind away from what your fingers are doing. And another way to listen to yourself is to record yourself. Well, you've probably all done that, but it is amazing what you learn when you listen back. I mean, it's just extraordinary. You think, for example, I think, I thought I was doing a massive writ there, but I don't even hear it. Or I thought I was doing a big gap between that chord and that chord, but I don't hear it because the acoustic makes it sound almost legato. So it's very, interesting. Also, you might notice, oh, I rush in that particular place. Oh, there's a surprise. That's because it's a difficult place. And we all rush when it's difficult. So, yeah, listening, recording yourself is of course, it's so useful nowadays that we're doing this live streaming, because you can, I don't know about you, but I sometimes listen back and see how I did. One other thing about listening, I don't know whether you do this. If the melody is in a particular hand or in the pedal, I try and listen to that. It kind of sounds like an obvious thing to say, but I have to force myself to do it, to actually listen to the pedal and not worry about what the hands and the accompaniment are doing. So that's about listening. And then over the next few weeks or months or years, even though I've said you should always use the same fingering, actually, I think we should all be open to new ideas and new fingerings and new interpretations and new speeds. Otherwise, we'll always play the piece the same way. So I think it's fine to make changes. In fact, George and I had a discussion about, you know, when you come back to a piece and you change a fingering, and you think, yeah, that's a better fingering. I'm going to use that from now on. Let's say it's in measure 40. And then when you play the piece the next day, I don't know about you, but from measure 30 onwards, I'm thinking about that change of fingering and worrying about it. And it always goes wrong. Even though it probably is a better fingering, but it's just difficult to get it right. Another thing George and I talked about was how do you keep your attention during a long piece, like a 17-minute piece, compared with a 3-minute postlude. And I'm not sure what the answer to that is. I guess if your mind starts wandering, if it's an easy passage in the middle of a long piece, I might think about what mood I'm trying to create in this passage, or I might force myself to listen to the melody, or I might think about my posture. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about posture at this stage, because often when you're in the middle of a piece and lots has been going on, I like to take the opportunity of an easier section to remind myself that I shouldn't be scrunched up like this. So I remind myself to sit up and not bend over like this. I did some Alexander technique once, and he suggested that if you're reaching the top manual, instead of bending over with your back, you should really be bending from your hips so that your back stays straight as you bend. But that's pretty difficult to do. It's very difficult on the organ. The organ is so awkward. But because of my Alexander technique lessons, I often think about my neck. Is my neck free? And is my head free? And am I sitting up? I sometimes suck my stomach in. I don't know why I do that. Or I sometimes think, can I feel my two sitting bones on the bench? Just being aware of your body, I think, is all useful. I used to have a lot of tingling in my right hand and aching in my left hand. Many years ago, I played an organ in Hastings, which is on the south coast of England, a very heavy organ. And then I had to take 6 months off because I had so much tingling here and aching here. And I guess it's a pinched nerve somewhere, here or behind, I don't know. But I love it. Sometimes you go to the doctor and you say you've got problems with your hand, and they look at your foot. But I guess it's all interconnected. The other thing, if my mind is wandering in the middle of a piece, I find it sometimes helps to think of a story to accompany the music. I can't really. I guess one example might be my teacher said that. Do you know the first movement of Mendelssohn's First Organ Sonata in F minor? It's basically full organ, full Mendelssohn organ, but occasionally there's a pianissimo chorale melody, and then it goes back to full organ. And my teacher suggested that you could imagine that the chorale is being sung by a few singers inside a church, but there's a group of you walking around somewhere outside. I mean, it doesn't. It's just a completely random thought, but I quite like thinking of things, like having images in my mind. It just helps me focus. And then I often start a piece at the wrong speed. So thinking of speed before you start is an important part of preparing a piece, I think. And I often at the top of my copy, the beginning of my copy, it says speed equals measure whatever. That's because I find it often quite difficult to work out what the speed is from the opening measures. But it's much easier to think of a usually faster, more complex bit later on in the piece. For me, it's easier to think what the speed is from that and then apply it back to the beginning. And then playing from memory. I don't know whether anyone plays from memory. I don't much, but I do a little bit. And I rather like it. I find it frees my brain. It frees my mind from reading the music. And it helps me listen more, too. But I do have... I don't know how other people memorize things, but I actually have spreadsheets on my computer and print them out. In one column is all the measure numbers, and then it's kind of grouped into sections. And so there might be a yellow section of 14 measures there, and then much later in the piece there's a yellow section in 14 measures there, which tells me that basically that section and the two yellow sections are basically the same. They might be in a different key, but they're basically structured in exactly the same way. And so I have various spreadsheets or maps with different colors, and that helps me memorize things. And then if there are, in the yellow section, if all the chords have 3 notes here, but all the chords have 4 notes here, then I would make some kind of marking to remind me, 3 and then 4. So I don't know how other people memorize, but I think I would imagine it's quite important to memorize in that analytical way, because you could memorize just using your finger muscle memory, but I would guess could be a disaster. In fact, I did do that when I was a schoolboy. In fact, it's this piece of Chopin I'm currently revising. It's a what do you call it? A rondo. So it kind of goes A, B, A, C, A, D, A or something. So A keeps coming back. But I think I was very naughty. As an 18-year-old schoolboy, I think I'd had a drink, which in England is acceptable. You can't drink here till 21, can't you? But anyway, I think I'd had a drink, and I was doing this performance for some parents, and it was going okay, A, B, A, C, but then when I got back to A, I kept bleeding into B, and I couldn't get out of A into D, or indeed into the final A, and it was just a disaster. I don't know how I ended. But, that's because I was just relying on finger muscle memory. So now I take memory much more seriously. Yes, now another thing I do, I like to try out, several weeks before a performance, I like to try it out, by which I mean play it through, not worry about what goes wrong, have fun with it, maybe even play it faster than necessary, see where you are when you've still got a month before the performance. Because just playing it through and having fun with it will give you ideas, give you new ideas. It will also guide you as to what you need to practice over the next month. And then on the day of the performance, as I did yesterday, I just enjoy. I don't want anything to alarm me or go too wrong, so I just enjoy playing through things slowly, or maybe some things fast. But then I like to, suddenly take a lot of time and just feel comfortable and confident with playing it. And when it becomes more complicated, just take lots of time and feel good about it. That's just what I do on the day of a performance. And the other thing, how do we learn from previous performances? For example, the Dupre toccata I played last night, the last time I played it in Birmingham, there's a Birmingham in England, but this is Birmingham. And I remember playing that Dupre and thinking afterwards, well, that was fine, but it was it was too careful. It was a bit too slow, and I was trying to play all the right notes. And so I learned from that. So last night, I think the piece should sound slightly crazy and carefree, and who cares if there are wrong notes. And that's what happened last night. We're nearly at the end of my notes here. Now that was all based on what would I do if there is no deadline. And of course, normally there is a deadline. And how would I do things differently? One thing I mentioned earlier is that I would listen to recordings, just because that immediately helps you know how fast something is or how people play it. And I guess I would just try and go through all the things I've mentioned more quickly, and not get too stuck on the technical practice. It's difficult. I mean, I like to learn everything properly, whether I'm learning whatever I'm learning, even a hymn, if I've never played it before. I want to learn it properly. I want to know whether I'm playing the alto part with my right hand or occasionally with my left hand. I want to make sure that I was taught that the bass line is played in the pedals and never doubled by the left hand. But then again, you might want to do a verse, in terms of changing registration, you might want to do a verse without pedals. So I guess you need to practice to be able to play it like that as well. So yeah, with a new hymn, I would just make sure, first of all, I can play it perfectly, and then I would think about registration changes to reflect the words, and giving time for the congregation to breathe when they need to breathe. And the same thing with psalms. I'm thinking of Anglican chant here. My teacher, when I was a teenager, said, well, either you need to learn the Anglican chant or you need to learn the words. And obviously you can't learn the words. I mean, the words. The reason you have to learn one or the other from memory is because you can't really look at two things at the same time. Oh, you could, but my experience is you look there and then you look back and you have no idea where you are. Obviously it would be too much to learn all the words if it's a long psalm. So it's much easier to learn the Anglican chant. And my teacher told me, well, just play it through in every key, which is good transposition practice. And by the time you've done that, you know it from memory. So that's, I mean, I do that to this day with a new chant. And then I practice psalms, once I've worked out the registration, just by singing it through to myself. I don't know a better way than doing that. With anthems, like George, I'm the only person. I'm the organist and choir master, which was not the case in England in my previous job. So here, if I'm learning an anthem, I start by learning my organ part, making sure I can play that perfectly. I then, since I'm the director of the choir as well, I also like to see if I can play the choir parts on their own. And then I would think about registration, and then I would think about where the choir's going to breathe. And then I would think about the complicated thing of, well, do I need to not play some of this with my left hand in order to conduct the choir? And I get in a bit of a mess with that. It's just it's terribly difficult. Yes, what does that say? Yes, maybe I'll just finish with that. So when I come back to a piece of music years later, personally, I like a clean score. I don't like lots of markings because that kind of confuses my brain. I also hate the fingerings I chose when I was 18 because I've lived longer now and I'm more wise, I hope, and I have different ideas. So I suppose I could rub them all out, but I've got clean copies of lots of music because I think you never stop learning and throughout your life. You never stop having new ideas, which is why, have I already said this? I know I can think of various pianists who have recorded something like the 5 Beethoven piano concertos at least twice, maybe 3 times in their career, or the 48 Preludes and Fugues of Bach several times, because they have very fresh ideas at age 60 or very different ideas to what they felt at age 25. So I have got to the end of my notes, and perhaps I should ask if there are any questions. Thank you all for listening so beautifully. Mostly just because I like that tempo, although I think I was too fast last night, but I think it was just taken by the tempo was just taken by how I was feeling or my mood, just at the time. But yeah, I haven't really noticed that actually. Allegro and Allegro maestoso. You mean for the opening kind of flourishes and then there's a fugal section? Yes. Are we sure that Mozart wrote that? Allegro and Allegro? Yes, you see, I think that's very interesting because if that's an editor, then I have no interest in it. But it might be Mozart. There is my teacher did give me a photocopy of how it's written out, I think originally on 4 staves. And he said you should play it from that score, Clive, but I never did. But I mean, his reason was that it's very useful to see how the independent lines work if you're reading from that, what I think is an original score. So, Allegro and Allegro maestoso. I remember playing something marked Allegro when I was young, and my teacher said, "What does Allegro mean?" And I said, "Fast," or something like that. And he said, "No, it means happy in Italian." But or maybe that's allegra. But anyway, his point was, as a teenager, as young people do, I was playing too fast, and you can have a happy tempo without being quite so fast. Thank you. Yes. So I haven't really. I'll have to look at the score because I kind of think of it as. So if you ignore the middle section, which is those kind of A flat major soft variations, the rest of it I kind of think as one standard tempo, which I think would fit the flourishes, dum, da, yum, ba, bum, which would also fit the fugue. Da, dee. I was faster than that, wasn't I? But basically it's one tempo. It's how I feel. So there we go. No other questions? Niels told me he was going to ask a really difficult one, but I think we're done. Thank you very much. I hope it was of some interest. Thank you.